It's a great honor to have you here for the continuation of this conference. It's a historic place. It's a place full of history, a place that saw people like Napoleon and de Gaulle, and where Bismarck was my predecessor, one of my predecessors. It's a great pleasure for me to bring together such outstanding researchers, political decision makers, journalists, and representatives of civil society today. The Kiel Institute and the CEPR certainly knew what they were doing when they launched this conference in 2022, as geoeconomics has proved to be more topical than ever before, given the global policy challenges. Russia's attack on Ukraine has shaken the foundations of European order to the core. President Putin is choosing violence over diplomacy. China is pursuing its rise with a resolve that is fundamentally shifting the existent balance of power. It is preparing to fill the gaps opened up by the shifts in the international power architecture. Even across the Atlantic, in our most important ally, we are watching with concerns as deep cracks form in the foundations of a democracy steeped in tradition. Against this backdrop, geoeconomics is currently more relevant than ever before as a discipline. It shows that economic decisions no longer merely have economic consequences. Rather, such decisions form part of global power struggles and determine who will be able to obtain influence, security, and prosperity in the international system. If we want to understand why trade routes are being fought over, why technology is becoming a strategic asset, or why energy policy increasingly displays geopolitical threats, then we need to think in terms of geoeconomics. In the 21st century, economic power is not only a goal, it's an instrument of power. That is why geoeconomics is not a marginal topic for experts, but rather a key discipline for politics, business, and society. Those who want to shape the future must learn to see economic and geopolitical concepts as two sides of the same coin. In this situation, economics is security politics, and conversely, security has become a prerequisite for economic stability. That is why we are focusing on the topic of defense in the first part of today's event. We all know that Europe needs to invest huge amounts in its defense capability. Mario Draghi has said that investments of 500 billion euro are needed in order to meet the agreed NATO targets. This is an enormous figure, but shows what is at stake. However, money alone does not create security. We need to achieve the greatest possible joint impact with every euro spent and to join up research with administrative decisions, for example, in procurement, more efficiently. I would like to share a quotation by the philosopher Raymond Aron with you. Peace is not the absence of war, but rather the ability to overcome conflicts. This is precisely the ability we are going to discuss today. Franco-German cooperation is essential in this field in particular. We need joint projects, common standards, and a shared vision. Only in this way will national defense capability become European security. We can also look forward to a special highlight today, namely the awarding of the 2025 Bernard Arms Prize to Professor Silvana Tenreiro for her outstanding work. Her research shows that how economic strategies have a direct impact on security and stability. The speech in honor of Professor Tenreiro will be given by Kenneth Rogoff, one of the most influential thinkers in the field of international macroeconomics, who will join us soon. Let us use this conference to explore new means of cooperation between research and politics, Paris and Berlin, and Europe and the world. And last but not least, I would like to thank the conference organizers, Isabelle Méjean, Moritz Schularick, and Christoph Trebesch, for their excellent work. I'm also grateful to all of our partners at Sciences Po, the Kiel Institute, and the CEPR. Thank you very much, and I give the floor to Madame Boutelet, who will introduce the panel participants. Thank you very much.
Yeah, Hello, thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Ambassador. I'm happy to call on the stage our distinguished panelists today, Moritz Schularick, Béatrice Weder di Mauro, and Xavier Ragot. Thank you for coming, for joining me on the stage, and good evening. I'm delighted to moderate this debate about the economics of defense, leveraging Franco-German collaboration for efficient defense spending. Let me say some words of introduction. 3.5 years ago, as Russia invaded Ukraine, Chancellor Olaf Scholz responded by declaring a Zeitenwende, a turning point marking the return of war to the European continent, and the end of the so-called peace dividend. Since then, the Zeitenwende has taken on a broader meaning, geopolitical, Mr. Ambassador, you spoke about it, economic and technological. Europe has become aware of its many vulnerabilities and of the need to spend more for its own security amid US retrenchment and the weaponization of critical supply chains. The nature of warfare itself has evolved. High-intensity conflicts now combines with hybrid threats. Drones and autonomous systems have become decisive on the battlefield in Ukraine. These technologies also represent new security threats within European airspace. This situation has led to a sharp increase in defense spending across Europe. In 2025, Germany added a major financial dimension to its security response. A constitutional change created significant fiscal space, reshaping the landscape of Europe's defense industry. German defense spending is set to increase sharply, reaching 153 billion in 2019. Another important shift, in my opinion, was announced in late September by the German Ministry of Defense. 35 billion will be invested in space by 2030. Minister Boris Pistorius has stressed the imperative of breaking down the traditional separation between civilian and military uses. On the French side, President Macron has announced an ambitious military programming law, Loi de Programmation Militaire, which will double the defense budget to around 64 billion by 2027. Resources may be more limited than in Germany, but France has deep industrial strengths, long-range strike, nuclear deterrence, and major expertise in space and strategic systems. And we should also mention the program SAFE, the Strategic Acquisition Fund for Europe, 150 billion in long maturity loans to member states requesting financial assistance for investment in defense capabilities. So the key question today, how do we ensure that this new money is spent well in Europe? How we do both address urgent capability shortfalls and invest in long-term technological sovereignty? How do we think, or maybe rethink, common projects to make them more effective? Can Franco-German cooperation serve as a model, a blueprint for others? How can we ensure that these efforts to strengthen our security also support industry, innovation, and long-run economic growth in Europe? So that's the question we will address in this panel. I would like to thank you for coming. Béatrice Weder di Mauro, you are president of CEPR, former member of the German Council of Economic Experts. You have shaped the economic debate, the European debate on fiscal rules and governance for many years. You will help us to understand how Europe can spend collectively in ways that are both sustainable and strategically smart. And you have just returned from China, Moritz as well. And you will certainly enrich the debate with your observations. Xavier Ragot, bonjour. You are Professor of Economics at Sciences Po and President of the Observatoire Français des Conjonctures Économiques, OFCE, a research center at Sciences Po. Your research focuses on industrial productivity, innovation policies, and you have been a prominent contributor to discussions on how Europe can rebuild technological capabilities and industrial capacity in strategic sectors. Thank you for being here. And Moritz, Schularick, I don't need to present you, but still you are the president of the Kiel Institute for the World Economy. As an economist, you have played an important role in shaping the debate in Germany on the need for fiscal space to finance strategic investment and defense. Under your leadership, the Institute has been developing strong expertise in defense and security economics, which I use as a journalist. Thank you very much. So to start the discussion, before diving into the proper team, let me start with a simple question, short answer. If you were a defense minister today and could fund just one priority for Europe's security, where would you put the next euro? Heavy conventional equipment, drones, satellite constellation, data, AI system, a European defense or startup or space startup, or maybe support for Ukraine, which has become the laboratory of modern warfare. Your answer, very short to start.
You're giving me exactly €1. €1.
No, the next one. It can be a billion one.
Because that is part of the problem, right? Yeah. We will not be able to do it in this way by going like, okay, let's do the most important thing, and then the next one most important, etc. But you know, if I play along, I would go for the drones because it is associated with a lot of the other things that you have mentioned too, right? They will only function if they have proper technology, and they will also need to be surveyed and so on. So.
And who makes a drone? That's a difficult
one. A European consortium.
Okay. Xavier, your turn.
Wow. So, defense minister of what country and who would be? Second question.
A random big European
it's
country.
A French perspective, but who would be the prime minister? That's part of the issue that we will discuss on. Is okay, we can decide, but the political constraint is kind of complex in the short run and the medium run. So I think it's part of the equation. So I can answer as an economist. Indeed, I would go for a high-tech industry. There's a joint report by the French Council, the Franco-German Council of Economic Experts. That's a group of Franco-German economists who wrote a piece recently saying that there are a couple of high technology field where we could move together, Franco-German side, which is artificial intelligence, drone, satellite. There are 5 high technology with lots of externalities on possibly other industries that we could invest on. So I would divide the euro in 5 and put a piece in these
it was not a question.
5 instruments. So I can give you example, but that's a more precise answer on this high technology externality.
Moritz.
Look, I think in the very short run, probably the marginal euro is best spent on Ukraine because the Ukrainians are defending our security in the West. But as Bea and Xavier said, I think, of course, we need a strategy how to become, let's call it sovereign, if you think about it in the French ways, or maybe gain strategic autonomy if you use the German words. Because in this new world economy that we're in, our lack of credible defense, our inability to defend ourselves as Europeans from these new threats is not just a security challenge, it's also something that's costing us very dearly in economic terms, as we've seen with the trade deal over the summer. So I think we need a strategy that has to be a European strategy, that has to be a high-tech strategy to maximize the spillovers and restart the European growth engine. But right now, in the very short term, I would not sink euros in traditional manned legacy systems. The highest impact for European security is in Ukraine.
Okay, thank you very much. Maybe the audience has some different ideas. You can ask for a question at the end of the debate. I would like to open with maybe the economic basic facts, which has been underlined by Mr. Ambassador and by the Draghi report. Europe's defense market is still deeply fragmented with many overlapping systems. Maybe to recall the obvious, what are the economic benefits we could expect from greater harmonization and cooperation, not only in terms of scale, but also in broader economic effects such as industrial capacity, productivity, technological spillovers, and growth? Xavier.
So, thank you. So, that's a good question, and that's more a kind of economist type of question. So, first, the economics of military spending, there are a lot of studies about the effect of those spending in the long run. There are some even meta-studies, summarizing studies. The overall effect is that we do not really know. In general, long-run military spending has a zero effect on the long-run growth, because it's kind of obvious. We construct capital base, which is normally, hopefully, not used. So the only thing that could have a long-run externality is the technology investment that could have some externality in the private sector in other type of industry. But the role of economists, I think, is first to minimize cost in defining the objective. And the objective, I think, is very part of the equation. As Moritz said, there are three objectives in the debate today. The very short run, 2030 and 2040. That's a 3-time horizon of the military spending debate in Europe. And if you want to minimize cost at these 3 horizons, you have different policies. So first, to define clearly what is a relevant time horizon, first. And second, to minimize cost at each time horizon. And third, to maximize technology externality. So we speak about DARPA in the US a lot, to have a kind of a pattern of institutional move toward dual technology was successful. The DARPA budget is 4 billion. It's tiny. So it's definitely reachable at the European level because it's very tiny. It's a budget of the French CNRS. So it's very, very small. So we can, at the European level, we can try to have that. It's not too big. And I think focusing on competition policy to reduce costs with the proper allocation of procurement among key players at European level. And we know that a huge vested interest across countries that we will discuss about. So competition policy, procurement to have a cost-effective industrial base in Europe, and maximize technology externality for European DARPA. I think that would be my 2 view as an economist of how we can contribute to more efficient military spending in the coming years. And I do not question the fact that we will increase in military spending. That's very important for defense, but that's not for growth.
Okay, thank you. Your opinion?
Yeah, I agree with Xavier on the DARPA numbers. They are small, but if you look at the overall R&D part of the US defense budget, for example, we're talking about roughly 15% of the US budget. In Germany, I'm sure there's some representatives of the armed forces here. The R&D budget, research and development budget of the German army or German armed forces is 1%. So there's huge catch up. And if you think about, you mentioned, Cécile, a German defense budget of roughly 150, 160 billion going forward. If you think 10% of that could be R&D, we're talking about 15 billion for Germany alone. That's 6 Max Planck societies. These are numbers that is roughly the entire budget of the federal research and research ministry. So this could be a game changer, and the numbers get really big. But I think what's important is that that in the planning, and there is no, which is probably the biggest problem for Europe, there is no plan right now. There's no plan how to substitute out of dependence on America, and there's also no plan to have quantitative targets for defense spending. If you ask around, what's our goal for R&D spending in the military budget, people won't be able to give you a number. If you say, what's the share of procurement in the new military budget, people won't be able to give you a target number. If you ask, what's your target for high-tech developments as legacy versus new the autonomous systems, the drone systems, etc., there are no hard numbers. The UK Defence Review proposed 80-20 recently in July, 80% for the new, sort of more disruptive autonomous technologies and 20% for the legacy systems. Sorry to say, but if you look at what the Bundeswehr has done since 2022, we've invested more than 90% in legacy systems. It's not, you know, it's an order of magnitude wrong in the percentages that I think we really need to develop that idea and that conviction much stronger and much quicker, that the war of the future is not the war of the past. And there's a, so repeatedly in history it happens that the military prepares for the last war, not for the next one.
Interesting. We will come back to that point. Béatrice?
Well, I would like to take the view from outside, which you already alluded to, just came back from China, so did Moritz, because we were at the same conference, and Hélène. We were exposed to a Chinese view, and it was very clearly expressed to me in different conversations in which they showed themselves a bit puzzled about how deep the trouble is of Europe. And that's where, you know, that I'm literally quoting, Europe is in deep trouble and has no plan how to get out of it. And I think in Europe, many people would agree with this view, but not to the extent that this is being, I mean, facing the consequences of what this means. From the Chinese point of view, this means that Europe also has no agency. It means that Europe is weak, does not have to be taken seriously, and essentially will continue to just be an appendix of the US. Does not have a chance of developing as a own pillar in any kind of multilateral system. In fact, there was one person who was saying the multilateral system of the future is China, US, and Russia. So I don't know where Europe was on that, but the impression, and I was really quite shocked. I was also shocked, by the way, by how we Europeans present ourselves outside, because we tend to do exactly what we do inside, namely talk about our own family disputes on who is doing what and paying for what and how. And when we do this on the international stage, people just look at us and think, okay, no hope, and maybe we don't have to care about Europe. We can go there and watch the museum and the monuments. So with this kind of perspective, what is it that we need to be doing? And I should add, when you then ask, how about Russia? So you don't trust Europe to be strategically autonomous, then Russia becomes a completely different conversation, because for us, Russia is the aggressor. The reason why we do not trust China is because Russia stands in between. That is clearly, it's at least one big reason why it is hard to have any kind of collaboration with China. But the other way around, if in China thinks that Europe does not have any agency and is just basically Russia is actually fighting US in Europe, then of course it is it's a very different perspective. So why am I saying all of this? Because there is only one answer from a European point of view. There is only one answer. Europe has to regain its agency very quickly. And so that is not a question of how can we do that in 15 years, because the aggression is now and here and present. And the question is a very different one, is how can we defend ourselves if the US does not stand by ourselves, by our side very, very quickly and effectively? And how do we build a sufficient, because the goal here is not to finance a European common, okay? We have a lot of European commons that are not being financed. We can have the same kind of discussion about many different things. Here, the goal is to build enough capacity to prevent an aggression, not to be able to fight microaggressions here or there, but in order to deter. And that requires a much bigger approach than the one how we started. Would you want to go, you know, a marginal euro here or there? Of course, I agree with the economic approach that we need to do this as efficient as possible. But the requirement here is to think big and to think European. And what this means is common European assets and common European liabilities for the common new additional capacity that needs to be built up quickly.
Okay, so you three of you agree with the fact that we have to do more together, and that we should do more together between Germany and France. But I have to challenge you now. I have to mention the elephant in the room. When we talk about Franco-German cooperation defense, we must acknowledge the difficulties. Two major Franco-German armament programs, FCAS, fighter aircraft, and MGCS tank, have struggled to take off. They were launched 2017 under very different assumptions. And now we know that national strategies and industrial interests have complicated progress. So I just want to be constructive, but it's a very important question. Should those projects be recalibrated? How do you see it? Why is it not working? And maybe how should we organize them differently? The method that must change. And honestly, given the speed at which Rheinmetall is expanding and diversifying across Europe, it's a fair question to ask if the states are the right person to do that. So that's my question. Xavier?
Couple of thoughts. First, I think, so the total of the budget of in dollars of Russia is roughly the sum of France and Germany. The thing is that we know that the cost is very different. So we must think in purchasing power parity, and the military power of in various dimensions of Russia is much higher than the sum of the two countries and the sum of many countries. But I tend, when I speak with people abroad, they tend to minimize, I think, our industrial military capacity between the four countries, let's say, of the euro area. I think it's understated. And they still have a coordination issue that we will speak about, but still they're strong industrial base that should not be minimized in front of Russia. The thing is, what is the political path to increase the scale, to cut costs, and to put forward the new technology for the next generation? Let's be a little bit pessimistic after, maybe I will become optimistic. You said that Europe has no plan. It's true. I tend to think that in many issues, France has no plan either. So I think the question of instability, political instability in Europe, in various countries, and including France, for the next 2 years, is not helping a lot to have some long-run commitment in new technologies, in new industrial capacity, Franco-German one. So that's what I have in the background, and I think many French people will have it in the background. We do not know what will happen in 2027 in France. And it can be a huge change for the worse or for something else. And I think the question of investment in the two subjects, the aircraft system and the ground system, that were normally some commitment for 2040, I think is key. In my case, I would do anything to make them survive for the couple of additional quarters before we see what is clear in France to put the money inside this project. I think there are two Franco-German projects. So it's not Franco-German and Spain for the ground system. So there are some firm invested, Dassault, Thales, Rheinmetall, we know that. So there are some industrial issues that we must discuss about the governance, things like that. But we should, you spoke about Ukraine, that's very important. For the next step, I think, to make those projects survive. If we are not able to invest and to find an agreement on these two projects, on the Franco-German, which is the least difficult, in a sense, in terms of European coordination. So if we are not able to deliver on these two projects, we can be a little bit not too optimistic for the future. I do not speak about, we can involve Poland, or we can involve, maybe we have to deal with the UK as well, which is an industrial power which has to be coordinated with Europe as well. So I think, as an economist, I would tend to, even if it's not totally efficient in terms of cost, the coordination game of these two projects is so high that I would put some huge pressure on the public debate to realize that we must invest in these two projects to make them survive. Even if the French industrial is not winning everything in the short run, I will not give names. I think we should try to, as a French, to put some money and a little bit of our sovereignty in these two projects, even if there are no short-run industrial return. And I think many people have some ideas of what I'm speaking about.
Look, I think one of the big problems in the room, in all these discussions, when economists, and we're 3 economists here talking about defense, is that we kind of slightly end up telling the military guys what they should be doing. But we don't know much about that. On the other hand, there is this strong, it's called strong, at least let's call it at least a justified idea that maybe we know things about new technologies and developments that are not quite as central in the military thinking right now. So on this point, let me make 3 points. First is, I can see a future where we're not unhappy that FCAS and the new tank failed. Because, as you said, these started in 2017. These are legacy projects. These are manned systems. Who really knows if we knew by 2040 when FCAS might fly or not, if we still need a man-piloted aircraft? I'm pretty sure that we don't need a manned tank anymore because we see the autonomous land systems in Ukraine already. And just to give you like idea, the economics of warfare is so different now. These tanks cost 20-25 million apiece. The drone that destroys them in Ukraine cost a few thousand euros. So even if you put another, which seems to be the current plan of the German armed forces, so we put another manned system next to the Leopard 2 tank to protect the manned system with another manned system that shoots down the drones. Even when you do that, the math doesn't add up. You know, so I think so that's point 1. Point 2, I generally speaking, I'm very, from what I see and hear between Berlin and Paris, I'm very skeptical that the cooperation with the traditional armaments companies, with which not just Germany and France, but most European nation states have fought each other for the last 150 years, which are deeply entrenched in the national political systems, which have strong lobby power on both sides, which have strong commercial interests that sometimes think they are the real force in the country, that the cooperation with these guerrillas will be feasible in a short enough time period that we have, as Bea said. This is not about 2040, this is about the next 3 years. Third point, this brings me to, I guess, all my money and all my hope is on the defense tech, on ideas to really leapfrog from the legacy systems, like the Chinese have done with the EVs, don't catch up with the combustion engines, but go to the next generation. I think Europe has a great chance that we've underinvested so much in this legacy stuff, which is kind of useless now anyways to some extent, but we really need to put all our chips on these future technologies, and that's also where we get the economic benefits. So I think let's talk much less about FCAS, let them play, you know, and sit in rooms and talk forever, but let's put the money and let's put our focus on the new technologies. And what we economists do understand is how to build institutions to finance global commons. And we have done that before in Europe when we had the Euro crisis, and we put the ESM in place as an instrument for a joint defense against that kind of instability. And there are enough proposals out there, including on several of the recent publications of the CEPR, for instance, in the book about the consequences of the second Trump administration for Europe. There are chapters written, some of them written by Moritz and his team, Jeremy has, and Bruegel have, and there is somewhere Daniel. And Hélène also has proposals. They all share one common theme, namely how to fund these innovative new technologies. Well, it is probably not done best if everybody does a little bit on their own. It will not be enough, and some countries don't have enough fiscal space. It needs some kind of structure, and it can be a new, as it was in one of the proposals, it's a new type of IMF around defense. In other proposals, it can be done with existing structures. But the important point there is that this
this new institution, European institution, cannot be exactly like the EU, because it would have to be open to have at least a strong collaboration, if not membership of the UK. So it's not the same as the 27, and it has to be able to have a clear mandate, and it has to own at least some of the cross-border important assets on its balance sheet, and therefore the liabilities for financing these assets would also not be on the current debt, would not be added to national debt. So that is the way to overcome, at least for the catch-up phase, the financing constraint that many countries are facing. Because if we start from the political economy, as you were saying, and saying, oh, we cannot finance anything, but then on the other hand, we are saying, well, we should be financing. Again, this is not the moment. This is not the moment for having that kind of discussion, because the threat is real and imminent. Yeah.
Just to make this tangible, maybe. I mean, the proposal that Hélène, since she sits there, and Philip Hilbrand and I have developed is exactly the idea that Team Europe, the coalition of the willing, would issue 1% of GDP in common debt each year for 10 years. So you have 10% of GDP in financial sort of firepower exclusively to finance these new technologies, these strategic enablers that we need, the AI hyperscalers, the space capabilities, the drone and AI research. And I think that's the idea, which would have also the nice side benefit, and I think, Hélène, if we're honest, that's also something that we think is very important, that by developing a common European bond market, we capture some of the convenience yield that the US is losing, and lower borrowing costs for everyone. So it's something that for politicians always hard to understand. It's like you issue more debt, you get a bigger market, and it makes it cheaper to finance it. But that's exactly the idea, and it wouldn't be the first time to look at the US, for example, issuing joint debt for defense with all these economic benefits that come with it could be a very good start. Yeah. Conditional, I think that's an important one, that this really goes into the future, into these new technologies and the infrastructure where we're also lagging behind economically.
And if I can just add, I think that the Chinese would listen, and not only the Chinese, if something like this was announced as a plan. And now I do have to add, and this goes back to the Franco-German discussion, that the initial proposal, as was put forward by Bruegel, which is a little bit different from the one that you had, but it's at the end of the day, it is also a new structure, whether you use existing structures or new ones, the idea is the same. And what happened is that there was a lot of pushback, both from the German side and from the French side, because the French didn't like the common assets and the Germans didn't like the common
Yes, I'm so happy that my French colleagues are defending debt. So that's usually that's a French view, that we should issue European debt to finance European assets, indeed. And so the credibility of France in this subject is not very high. So I think it's good that you take the lead for pushing some idea of some joint debt, a safe asset, that would allow to invest in European assets. Okay, I think that what we are saying for years does not seem that we are going in this direction. I do not start from the political economy, but now, having worked a little bit for years on European institution building, at the end of the day, the political economy is key. So, and how can we try to construct this object? I think how can we reach at least a Franco-German agreement, or a small subset of countries, including maybe Italy and Spain, for instance, in the EU, to have a joint project with some European liability, investing in some European market to finance high-tech dual technology, or even military spending in the new technology you are referring to, satellite, artificial intelligence. What is the political path to reach this goal that I think we would agree as an economist on this goal? Is it to start with a Franco-German agreement? And that's why, as a FCAS and the tank, I have it in the back of my mind, because the failure is not really a technology failure, it's a political economy failure, I think, so of my understanding. So it's not a very good sign of what we could do. So the way I want to be optimistic, so I still believe in European safe asset, investing in financing markets or new tech, in dual technologies, things like that. I think we should buy a little bit of time for France to be a little bit settled down in terms of strategy. I'm very practical on this issue. I do not see the credibility of finance minister to change the French industrial base in the coming weeks, let's say, things like that. And then to try to have a European project with 4 countries, with some pushing a lot on some liabilities to please the French, and some assets to try to make some. We need some political power to make a little bit of pressure on our 4 big industrial firms, which have a lot of power in France. And I think we need a strong state for that. So that's, I think we agree a lot on the tools, on the objective, on the market, the competition, the procurement, European level, coordination, cost base, which is reduced a lot. But as an economist, as you said, we are a little bit short in terms of the political path to reach this level. And the way to start with, that's why I agree. I think it would be to start with European debt. And then we need to find an asset to invest, which is the most efficient.
Yeah, maybe I could add something which would go in your direction and also in Moritz's direction. As a journalist, I had the chance to visit 3 fascinating European startups operating in defense and space sector. Helsing, they are very famous. Helsing, the exploration company, and ESA Aerospace. They are in Munich, but they are operating in multiple countries with Franco-German or pan-European teams, even on board level. And I found it fascinating to see how they already work together in a genuinely Franco-German way or European way. And some of the other teams say they share a similar corporate culture shaped by experience in tech companies such as Meta. So I'm asking myself, is not maybe the future that a model in tech company which is already working and sometimes I'm asking myself if it's a generational issue that younger engineers and entrepreneurs overcome more easily national thinking.
I mean, that's exactly what I meant when I said I put my money on the defense tech guys. They think from the beginning in terms of external networks. They think international. They don't stop at European borders. They're not entrenched with the national politics. So I think that's on the sort of on that level a hope that we have, and I think the European defense tech sort of ecosystem is very active, and a lot of things are happening, much more probably than in other parts of the tech universe. But you still need the line that I always use, which the numbers are correct, but it's still mind-boggling, is that Starlink, to set up Starlink, which is one of the big gaps European communications and intelligence capabilities coming from space. There's some alternatives, but I can't do nearly what we would like to do. Starlink has cost less to set up than the additional train tunnel that's currently planned in Germany between Munich East Station and Munich Central Station. So it's not a question of money. It was roughly 10 billion, a little over 10 billion. It's not a question of money. It's not even a question of technological capabilities. It's really a question of, like, does someone press the button and say, we need, as Europeans, in the next 3 years, we need to produce 3,000 satellites and develop the launch capacities to shoot them up. And no one pushes that button. There is no attempt to scale up, there is no coordination, and there is no one who says, like, this is the plan.
So the state as client, so you define what you want to buy and you let the market work.
Sure, I think the same would, yeah, Bea, you go, but I think the same would very much go for sort of, you mentioned Helsing, you mentioned the drones. Of course, I mean, if our AI is not as good as the AI of the others, then our drones won't be as effective. So you can't separate these systems. So the big investments in AI, in research infrastructure, in autonomous systems, think about robotics. I mean, drones will not just fly and swim and drive. They will probably also walk at some point, you know? And I mean, there's so much happening. So we can't afford to be cut off on that. And I think that the government as an anchor investor, as someone who sort of procures capabilities. Ethan has done a fantastic report for the Kiel Institute on these things. Someone, as a state, as someone who procures capabilities instead of these like meticulously designed ex-ante systems like FCAS, where, I mean, just remember, I mean, in 2023, we designed the airplane for 2040. I mean, something is wrong, right? I mean, because we don't know what the technology is going to be in 2040. So we definitely need to change the way we think about innovation in this ecosystem where civilian and military research and innovation are so tightly interlinked.
Well, and if we are basically only ready to defend ourselves in 2040, then what are we doing the next 15 years? We are cozying up to Donald Trump and asking, please, please don't leave us alone. What are we doing? I mean, it's great that we have much more innovation in Europe than is often perceived. And yes, we should talk about it. We should use it as effectively as possible. But the question here is one of scale. And I think it is also a question of governance. Why is nobody pushing the bottom? Because nobody has a bottom. There is no such bottom right now in Europe. The EU doesn't have it because it doesn't have the responsibility for defense, and the individual countries are not getting together and all of a sudden doing a job for everybody. So this is why, this is the actual Franco-German project should be, right? To build this kind of intergovernmental structure that builds a bottom in order to be able to spend this money jointly and fund it jointly in a way that is scaled, to achieve scale at speed. And it's so obvious. It's so obvious when you start to think about it. It's really not complicated. It may be very complicated in terms of the technology, and we don't know where exactly the technology would be, but in terms of what needs to be done, it's not.
We put some money. So the French budget, is supposed to go from 2% to 3.5%, and German is increasing as well. So the way we will finance it, I think, in France, maybe through taxes, not debt. It should be in France through taxes or net taxes. So we should reshuffle public spending to increase our military spending. In Germany, you have a fiscal space for debt, and any additional money at European level with a safe asset would be welcome. This is a huge amount of money that the state is putting. So there's an opportunity for coordination between states. It's not European money. We are not increasing the contribution to the EU. The debate is in the wrong direction on this level. So I think we should think in terms of intergovernmental coordination. And in this level, you are stuck with political economy. We are stuck with the prime minister, with the finance minister. What is the leverage you get at the international level to move in Franco-German way? Because we are putting such a huge amount of money, and that's the only space where there's kind of a national agreement in France. So I think we should leverage on this new money to have the most efficient use of this French money for Europe, on German money for Europe, French economists to fight a little bit some vested interest, maybe the same for German economists. That's our role, I think, in our own country. We need some data for France. That's a usual claim for economists. We don't have the data to assess the industrial base, but we miss some. Who is really getting the French money in terms of cost efficiency, of big firms, startups, the value chain of industrial system in military sector? We do not know a lot about it. There are lots of missing data. So I think as French economists, we must do our job to put a lot of European dimension in the French spending. And the same in US. And if we are able to do that in the 2 years where we are leveraging on military spending, we can start something. But putting directly a focus at the European level for the coming years, I would love that it could be possible, but I'm not that optimistic. So I would love to show me that I'm wrong, but I'm not totally optimistic at this level.
Maybe I can make one point on Bea. I hope this works. Yeah, it works. And one on what Xavier just said. So on Bea, I think it's, as you said, it's also like once you start thinking about it, it's so obvious, and it gets, I get really infuriated because it's like it's so obvious and so little is happening. And if you're going to get really furious or depressed or whatever, anxious, is that currently there is no organization, no government officials, no ministry department that is actually actively planning that European dimension. Because our defense planning takes place within the context of NATO. And NATO's defense planning assumes that the Americans are always going to be there with their intelligence, with their air transport, with their communications abilities, etc. So we're in this catch-22, where the military guys say, no, we cannot plan outside of NATO because NATO is our defense backbone. And the more we plan within NATO for NATO without the Americans, the more we push them out, so we do nothing. So there is right now no European pillar of NATO that has a plan that says, like, by 2029, Europe has to have Starlink, has to have this AI capability, these communications, etc., etc. So that's really depressing, no? To Xavier, I think the way the political economy will eventually work is the following, because there's a strong asymmetry in the defense spending between France and Germany. As you said, France is going to spend 60 billion, Germany is going to spend 160 billion. And the more Germany actually makes good use of this money, which I'm not saying we have even started to do, but if Germany is actually perceived as doing something useful with this money and increasing capabilities, at some point, I bet you the French are going to jump on the boat and are going to say, like, you can be with us, come on, otherwise we do it alone. But the current negotiation setup is far too, I think it's a minefield of lobby interests, which makes it far too difficult. So I think what will actually happen is that the Germans will pull ahead and will spend 100 billion more per year, and at some point France will say, like, oh, we better jump on that train and do it together.
No, I agree with this assessment, and I think it's important that you brought in the importance of NATO and the European pillar of NATO, which is not really a pillar. It is because at all the center of the European NATO is the American command, right? And so there is no such thing as a European pillar of NATO which would stand alone, and that's exactly what we are talking about.
So we have 15 minutes of question of the audience. I see already many hands, of course. Yeah, Mr. And 3 and 4. So maybe we will collect 3 questions from the audience, and then we can...
Thank you. I'll go quickly. I'm not an economist. I've only been a businessman in the defense industry during the Cold War and after the Cold War, and then an academic and a think tanker. But I'm not an economist. And that maybe will allow me to fill in a little bit in the discussion. Timelines. That was the good question that you posed. And I think you all more or less gave the same answer. Ukraine is hyper-urgent. It's the here and the now. Then we have 2030 and then something else, Zukunftsmusik. If we take that planning seriously, and in the defense world, seriousness is about lives, it's about destruction, it's not about efficiency, it's about effectiveness. And that is where I think I have a really big cognitive dissonance with Xavier. It's not about efficiency, I'm very sorry, it's about getting the job done. And if need be, in a very rough, brutal, and inefficient way. If that is the case, FCAS and GCAP in the UK should be put to the side for a very long time. As one British knowledgeable person said, GCAP is a little bit like people who would have designed the bomber of 1955 in 1935. Well, the bomber that was needed in 1940, 41, 42. So if you take the timeline seriously, you have very direct and brutal policy consequences. And that leads me to my question. If that is the case, and if legacy systems are also out, because we have this extraordinary human sciences natural project going on in Ukraine, where you know what works and what doesn't, and it's paid in the coin of death and destruction. Well, the tank and the GCAP, etc., all of that should be pretty much behind that. How have the Americans and how have the Chinese created ecosystems favorable to the use of artificial intelligence and information technology generally in the field of defense? Not by doing another big European interstate institutional project. What would you do in order to see Europe promote the ecosystem, which is not going to produce?
Thank you. Sorry, I have to interrupt you.
Europeans know how to do. We are supposed to be doing something which had never done before. How would you do it?
Okay, that's a question. Okay, do you remember this question? Many thanks for your question. I will take 2 additional questions in order to permit everyone to have this possibility.
Thank you. Now, in your very interesting debate, you have taken for granted the urgency of acting on defense, which is something that I fully share, and I guess that all people in this room share. If I look at parliamentary debates, I don't see that urgency. So, in budget, if there is a will, there is a way to find the resources to cope with this urgency. My fear is that the public at large, the voters at large, are not really empowerment government to give this.
Maybe we could specify where we come from. Are you French?
Sorry? Oh yes, I'm Carlo Monticelli from the Council of Europe Development Bank.
Okay, thank you very much. I will take a third question. Can you short present yourself before? Yeah, okay.
Okay, my name is Stephan. I'm the CEO of Euronext. You guys seem to indicate that the issues are quite simple from a pure economic concepts point of view. This is an industry that needs scale, but the buyers are local. So you have a huge tension between scale is needed, but the fundamental players are local, and that's the core of the sovereignty. So that's not the only sector where these things exist. I run a company that manages stock exchanges across Europe, and we have typical same issues of the scale, the liquidity of markets is the solution, but initially the players are very local, and that's something that is very common in other sectors. Where I would like to have your views is that you see, and that's a very tough question, no, it's not a tough question, it might be a provocative question. You seem to insist that the problem is the political resistance. I would argue, and I would like to have your views, that the problem is the industrial players' resistance. You referred to what happened in the 30s and 40s. Any time in every history of the world where you had to face rearmament situations, governments stepped in and twisted the arms of industrial players. Every time you let the industrial players to do what they think is good for them, every time you let them have the intellectual hegemony of the project, then you have situations where they do what they are supposed to do to maximize shareholders' value, and they try to look at why they are more legitimate than others. The only solution to get to scale and to force industrial players to get where you want them to go is to do what Jean Monnet and Schuman did for the European Community for Steel and Coal, where the guys who were managing steel and coal in France heard about the project when it was announced to the press. So if you had asked the border forces what they think about the Schengen Agreement, they would have told you crime, immigration. Now, some people said, well, there is something more important, which is freedom of movement. So my question is, do you think that time has come to decide what they will do for the common good instead of listening them resisting to changes?
Thank you very much. So can we maybe answer, Moritz?
I can happily start with the last question because it's something that is very present, front of center of what I'm thinking. There's a big lack of coordination, of political coordination, to, as you say it, in previous mobilizations, you mentioned Jean Monnet, Germany can look to Walter Rathenau, in the UK to Lord Beaverbrook. In these critical situations, generally speaking, there was a guiding hand of the government, coordinators that allocated resources, that brought things together, and that solved that coordination issue between the military industrial companies, the defense, the army and the defense forces, and political leadership. And that's not happening in Germany. I think it's a big lack, a big gap of what should happen. And I think on the European level, the problem is compounded. Right now, I think the most imminent, and this connects to your question, the most imminent task is to scale up. Yeah, Germany is a country that can produce 10,000 cars a day, but is unable to produce 100 tanks a year. Something here is wrong. And that coordination has to happen very fast. And I agree, we will have to scale some of the legacy systems just to be ready by 2028 or whenever to have a credible thing. But the second thing we also have to do is we have to plan capacity. So far, no one asked the questions, what industrial capacities should Europe, should Germany, should France have to produce drones by 2028? Should we be able to produce 5 million like Ukraine this year? Or 10 million like Ukraine next year? Or just 8,000 like the German armed forces are currently planning? You know, these are very essential questions of sort of industrial planning and capacity planning that are currently not asked. And I think they all come back to what you said. If there is no political coordination and politicians also linking their, you know, the sort of the electoral well-being to this agenda and saying this is my agenda now, then it will not happen. Yeah. If you ask, I mean, I think this example is perfectly clear. If you ask the border forces, should we have a Schengen agreement, that would, you know, it would take 20 years, and the answer would be probably not. So exactly right. Someone has to go ahead now and make real decisions.
Béatrice.
And I would like to link the question about the urgency with your questions. Why is it not really happening? Well, it is not happening for the same reasons, and you were very right about this. It's not the only place where the European Commons are not being funded, because we didn't set up the European project to fund European Commons in the first place, or only very marginally. And so far it has worked okay-ish with our slow approach to then filling in some of the gaps. But clearly, the free rider problem is never really overcome in these structures, and the free rider problem is enormous here, because everybody has a temptation to say, oh well, look, I am very far from the border from Russia, and anyway, Ukraine is far away, and already we already have a distinction between different European countries, feeling of how much they should be contributing, yes or no. But that is the typical free rider problem. The problem of urgency, I think, has to do with the question is, are we at war or not? And there is definitely not a feeling in the population right now that we are at war, but I do see increasingly that politicians are saying we are no longer at peace. And this is already being quoted. We are in some kind of hybrid war, and there are these disturbing aggressions which are not only happening very, very close to the Russian border. So if we are de facto in hybrid war, then the question of urgency should eventually be answering itself. And then the question is, is that enough to overcome the political economy? Because a war economy is clearly a different type of government involvement that gets then mobilized typically. If we were at it, and this is the reason why Ukraine produces 10 million, right? Because they are actually at war, and we think we are not.
Xavier, do you want to add something?
Yeah, it's a little word on tank and planes and stuff like that. I think the subject is, I would phrase the subject differently. I do not care really about FCAS or MGCS. The question is that the Charles Leclerc, we have it for the next 10 years, we can adjust it, and Rafale, we have it for the next 10 years, something like that. What would be the next technology? Should we do it on the French basis or European basis? FCAS and MGCS is do our best to do it at the European basis. There will be some airplanes in 10 years. That's the only thing we could try to do together. It's not that long, 10 years. It's not that long. Okay, we must increase ammunition, we must increase drone production, but some technology where there could be European externality, if we are not able to assess something because of some, I don't know if it's vested interest or different strategy or lack of communication, but try to make it European. In France and in Germany as well. You spoke about big numbers. I think it should be our role to be efficient or effective or whatever, I do not know the word, but to try to this big amount of public money that we will put in the economy for industrial base, to make it a little bit efficient in cost base, because we know that the price is a kind of a big, the deflator of the military spending is a big issue in Europe, and to try to create a little bit of European, Franco-German, Italian, common interest on this subject. I have to stop here. I think there's some movement.
Thank you very much, Xavier. Sorry to interrupt you. I'm sorry to have to stop this debate. So interesting, because the minister is coming, and I give you the word, Xavier.
Thank you, Cécile, and thank you, everyone. And as Cécile said, we're very honored to have Minister Rufo with us today for a keynote. I think we have laid out a big panorama, big canvas of for her to draw on now. So I hear she's there, and we will hand over to her right away. Hello. More Schularick. Madame la Ministre, merci d'être venue.
So, Mr. Ambassador, dear Stephan, dear Professor, Madame Méjean, dear President, distinguished guests and participants. It's the first time in this position. I come here, but I'm used to be there in very many other postings, and I know very well the famous Kiel Institute. With you know, the famous ranking, and I had in my previous posting to fight hard for this ranking, and I know this is not only that, but it is very famous in Paris and especially in the administration for that. But really, we've been working very well with you because I mean we were in a sort of you know, in a situation where we couldn't make it public on everything for obvious reasons because it's a war. And at the same time, we wanted to give you all the information you need. So, but we solved the problem. and I know that it's not only about this ranking, and it's also about your very important contribution on economics of defense. And I know that the work done in your institute that have been groundbreaking on a lot of issues, and plays a very important role on leveraging the Franco-German cooperation on the efficiency, basically, of defense spending. Of course, when I had the paper about this event, I mean, maybe it's obvious, but being here today to discuss in a conference on geoeconomics about defense, I mean, look at the situation. I mean, 5 years ago, it would not have been possible. We wouldn't have think about that. And I think this is important because it shows that, on the one hand, now everybody gets that defense, economics in defense are critical to defense policy. And on the other hand, we need to take care of efficiency because, as you know, and now that I'm a minister, I know at my parliament, everybody is looking at every single euro spent in defense. So that's very important for, I think, all of us to be very efficient and to spend more, but consistently with our strategic goals and the reality of the balance of power in front of Russia. Maybe I would not be long. I prefer having a debate, but I don't have the right to do debate anymore. Maybe a few remarks, three remarks I would like to make about the very important debates you had today. Well, first of all, maybe it's obvious, but you all know that concretely we live in a world where our adversaries are rearming in an accelerated way. I have figures on that. I would like to share it again with you. I mean, to give orders of magnitude, Russia has seen its military expenditure grow by 70% in 24 compared to 23. And again by 30% in 25 compared to 24. Of course, it's because of the war in Ukraine. So this is normally the case when you are at war to have more defense spending. But it is more. I think it is about modernizing, preparing for the future and the next step. And if you look at China, which was talking about a peaceful rise, you have, an increasing in defense spending by almost 15% just the past couple of years. So it's a lot, and it's about having more capabilities in growing in precision, scope, and lethality, basically. So we are in front of that, and I think today, but under your control, Excellency, European people are very well aware of the fact that we need to spend more on defense. For years, I've been there to discuss the famous strategic autonomy. What does that mean? Do we need more NATO, more Europe? I mean, look at the landscape, this debate is over. Everybody knows that we should do more, and we should do more in close coordination in all the organizations. And I mean, Germany is spending more. We now have a very important control of our parliament on our spending, and this is very important. And I think we have this necessity to work together to be sure that in a period of time where you have, on the one hand, a very difficult fiscal context in a lot of European countries, and on the other hand, the necessity to spend more, I mean, the equation leads you to see what you can do together and how, not only talking about how much you spend, but how do you spend? And this is where economics, I think, really definitely can play a critical role for defense policy. Maybe the second point I would like to make is precisely about not only the fact that I think we all share here that we should spend more, how do we should spend more on defense today? The work done by the Kiel Institute has been very inspiring in this regard, and especially, I mean, the Guns and Growth, very beautiful name, by the way, maybe inspired of the Guns and Roses, I don't know. But this report from, I think it was in February, and I mean, with this very good expression on the fact that defense should be a European public good, and I think this was very important to put it this way. Of course, you know, I mean, in the Ministry of Armed Forces, it's well known that we keep explaining that defense is and should stay sovereign. And it's not only for reason of, I mean, it's not only for principles. It's because of efficiency. I mean, we have nuclear deterrence, so we know that being able to look at what you need in terms of conventional weapon, what you need in terms of defense architectures. I mean, we have all that we need in France to do it nationally speaking. We need to use these capabilities of having military program laws, see what should be the best architecture for our own security. And we need to put it together and to not, you know, to create something else that would be late, I think, in a period of time where we should accelerate. Having said that, I think that this is critical at the same time that Europe plays a very important role, especially in terms of economics and of industry. I mean, this is of the essence if we want to have a robust deterrence, defense and deterrence, we need to have a robust industry. And for having a robust industry, we need exports and we need all the metrics of economics. So it's very important to keep the balance between national competencies and the boost we need to have at the European level. And we need to find the good method to do that. So we all know what we've done in the past years. We have good instruments, I think, now. Remember the beginning of the war, we had nothing. or very little instruments. But look, for example, at instruments like the European Peace Facility, which was not at all designed for supporting in a large scale a country at war with lethal equipment. I mean, it's been critical in the rise up of the European partners and us to support Ukraine. Now we have new instruments. I remember the summit in Versailles, the very beginning of that. It seems a long time ago, but it was only 3.5 years ago, and we made huge progress in that direction, of course, with especially the European Defense Industry Program, EDIP, the Security Action for Europe, SAFE, a lot of acronyms, but definitely very critical instruments to fulfill the well-known now capability gaps. And what is, I think, very important is that for the first time, I think, we have a clear picture and vision at the European level with the White Book, basically, of these capability gaps and this shared vision of what we need to fulfill. And I think this is very important to be well organized and to have instruments. Maybe one word on the domains. I mean, if you look at the White Book, you have sorry to put it this way, but classical gaps. And in all the papers I read for preparing this event, I could see a sort of difference between the classical domains and the new one, as we call it. And basically, when talking about new generation of air and missile defense, when talking about hypersonic weapons, when talking about strategic enablers, and by strategic enablers you can hear cloud, artificial intelligence, cyber, robotics, satellites, drones. I like the word, maybe it's yours. It's European by design, because there is no border when talking about cloud, artificial intelligence, and these new domains. And because I think the way of financing this kind of investment maybe is different from what we've done before. And this is where, I mean, my words are official, so I need to be cautious, but I think we should have no taboo in the thinking about defense economic issues. There are a lot of very interesting works done, for example, about defense bonds. It's interesting, we should have a look at it with people that are looking very carefully about that. But what I like very much in what I read to prepare this event is the link between this necessity of accelerating on the usual domains on the one hand, on the other hand, the need to accelerate at the same time on new domains, which are by design European, and in this, I think we have ideas, new ideas to put on the table, and I would like to work with you on that. And third point, maybe what could we do, Excellency, together, France and Germany, of course, to accelerate this new economy of defense that we should build in Europe. So we are very big, important cooperation, of course, the future combat air system and the main ground combat system. And I would like to reassure everyone we are discussing very well. I was in Berlin last week, and we prepared very carefully the meeting of our leaders in December. You have huge capabilities in your industrial base. We have a very important industry, and we are prepared now for having, I mean, I'm looking at the word to translate surmarche, and I think it's a boost, how do you call it? But we are going to spend more on defense, and I think we need to synchronize. And we did it in the past years. We worked very well in the so-called ELSA initiative on deep precision strike capabilities. I think we launched it together. We just signed this new initiative called Kiel/Odin's Eye, creating precisely new capabilities for European domains. And it has been a very intergovernmental cooperation at the beginning, but I think there is a clear necessity of articulating the European level in terms of architecture, economical architecture, and this new impulse from the military side and the defense side to get new capabilities. So we've been doing a lot. I think we need economics and report at the one you've made. And I will maybe stop there, but just to tell you, I think we need to strategize a little bit. Because, I mean, we are all spending more in defense. We need to de-risk our defense sector, but our economy as well, in the context of big geopolitical tension we have today. So we have the same objectives, but we need to strategize on the how do we do that. And we need to articulate precisely what you've done in terms of economics work and the strategic thinking that we are used to in France. And this could be a new era for Europe, because, I mean, Europe was built on economics. Now we have to build it on defense, but we need to do both at the same time, and it's not because I was advisor to President Macron, but really we need to do en même temps economics and defense, and I hope we can work together to continue in that direction. Thank you very much.